This meeting started at exactly 2:30 p.m. and is targeted to end at 3:30 p.m. Good day to my fellow social science experts in this virtual meeting. We are gathered here today to discuss the possible actions in solving problems related to our respective fields in the midst of the pandemic.
We specifically invited one expert from each of the 9 main fields of social science for this occasion. It is hoped that our discussion and recommendation will benefit the local government units and encourage them to create policies regarding these matters.
The flow of today's program will go as follows. There will be 2 sections all in all, and each of us experts are required to speak. The first section will introduce the problems or issues that arose during this pandemic that can be covered by assigned social science, and the possible reasons why these problems occurred. The second section will focus on our opinions and recommendations as to how these issues may be solved.
The order of speakers by department are as follows. Starting with history, then political science, linguistics, geography, psychology, anthropology, demography, and finally sociology. Minutes will be noted by Michael Gabutan and will be distributed to each member via Gmail after the meeting. Without further ado, let us start now the first section.
Hello guys, before I will report the problems facing about my field during the pandemic, let me introduce my field to you and what it actually covers. History comes from the Greek word historia, meaning inquiry, knowledge, or acquired by investigation. History is the study of the past. Historians place the past in context using historical sources such as documents, oral accounts, and ecological markers, and also material objects including art and artifacts. History focuses on exemplifying the relationship between the stability and transition from past events. Now, we go to the bigger picture of the problem history is facing during the pandemic. 2 examples of the problem history is facing is the cancellation or postponement of events where cultural events have been postponed due to the pandemic and also potential job loss. Hence, the potential measures of the pandemic have brought limited analysis of humanity's solution to ongoing social problems to be compared and contrasted with the minds of historians, together with historical researchers. It is important to keep in mind that history in our society has never faded up at present times. Thus, it is also our obligation to keep our preserving on history, for this connects us to our past being who we are now. This is where I end my report about history. Thank you.
Hello everyone, today we'll be tackling the world of political science. Now before I start, let us first begin with the very definition of political science. Political science, or polsci, is actually derived from the Greek word polis, which means citizen, and polis, which means city. It is best defined as the study that deals with the systems of the government and the analysis of political activity and behavior. Now, the problem is, how does political science play a big role in the worldwide pandemic we are currently facing? Referring to the article by Professor Jane Duckett in August 2020 stating, political science research has an important role in understanding how to best tackle pandemics like COVID-19 by rigorously analyzing these different governmental responses internationally and the interplay of ideology, systems, and capacity. It helps us to understand what policy measures governments have adopted and why, and what their socio-economic as well as their epidemiological impacts have been. It is important to keep in mind that the people in authority have the most power during these unfortunate times in our country. Thus, it is essential to keep in track the decisions and political strategies made by our government to fully understand the current state of the country. This is where I end my discussion. Thank you.
Before I report about the problems in relation to my field, during the context of this pandemic, let me introduce you to the concept of linguistics and what study what the study covers. Coming from the word lingua, which literally translates to language, linguistics deal with the analysis of language is formed and evolved, the nature of language and its formal properties. Scholars like Ferdinand de Saussure, who believed in bilateral sign, implying words have symbolic meanings, and Jacques Derrida, who believed in deconstruction, learning to see the aspects of truth and that might lie buried in an opposite, pioneered the rise of modern linguistics in the 18th century, and it grew into the study we know today. Entering the era of current pandemic, these problems within the linguistic spectrum have come to light, though most have already existed prior to this. An example of which is the language barriers, which hinder a smooth communication process between two or more parties, because even though people may seem to speak the same language, there are dialectical variances, just like the Filipino language. Considering the rise of technological advances in this period, we've probably met people from around the world just by playing or conversing with them online. Have you tried speaking to a foreign acquaintance who's not really fluent in the universal language? This results in misunderstandings and gaps in communication, a very crucial loss, especially during a global crisis. In connection to the first problem, linguistics' limitations in relaying health and care information in the local dialects is also a rising problem. There aren't many media networks catering to most regional dialects, and a lot of things get lost in translation. An example, some words in a native language don't have an equivalent word in another language, or the word means different. Lastly, and this is the problem we should keep an eye on, misinformation, possibly because of fear, mongering, or wrongly interpreted discourses. Relaying the right information is of utmost importance due to the fact that it plays a major role in every other sector in society. It not only helps people to follow protocols in hopes of avoiding the virus, but it also helps provide the solution or cure we've all been looking for. This is where I end my report on linguistics. Thank you.
At this point, allow me to proceed discussing the economic situation of our local community. So when we talk about economics, we do understand that this discipline studies the people's production, distribution, and consumption of goods and services. In fact, the word economics comes from two Greek words, echo, which means home, and nomos, which means accounts. Moreover, this discipline is split into two categories, macroeconomics and microeconomics. In line with that, our economic growth has been slowing down due to the current global pandemic. Specifically, these are some of the economic issues that arose from the impact of SARS-CoV-2. Reduction of productivity, loss of life, business closures, trade disruption, decimation of the tourism industry, direct impacts on income due to premature deaths and workplace absenteeism, and negative supply shock. So how did these issues arise? To be more specific, what caused these problems to occur? Well, the economic systems have been disturbed ever since the start of quarantine. Since the lockdown, human needs and goods were all in demand, and it affected the flow of resources in the country. Panic buying also made the situation worse because people have been buying more than what they actually need. Furthermore, the imbalance of the resources has rendered the notion of scarcity, and because of the lack of commodities, the economy cannot produce all of the goods and services that its citizens demand amidst the pandemic. In socioeconomic implications, the travel restrictions, social distancing, and self-isolation has led to a reduced workforce unable to supply and flow back to its normal stability. That ends my report about economics. Thank you.
I will be talking about geography. Geography is a systematic study of the universe and its features. It is the spatial study of the Earth's surface, from the Greek word geo, which means earth, and graphen, which means to write. Geography seeks to understand where things are found, why they are here, and why they develop and change over time. Geography helps us to understand basic physical systems that affect everyday life. How water cycle and ocean currents work are all explained with geography. These are important systems to monitor and predict in order to help lessen the impact of disaster. The COVID-19 crisis has affected every part of the country, and indeed many other countries. What sets this crisis apart is the many different ways that is impacting families. While the virus itself is primarily a public health issue, the unprecedented responses it has necessitated means that this is also very much an economic and social crisis. Border closures have restricted international travel, uneven distribution of the virus across and within countries, geopolitics and crisis management, the existing inequalities that COVID-19 has exacerbated, limited response from the government and other volunteer organizations during typhoon outbreaks and other calamities, damaging of tents that functions as trade centers, testing areas, and wards due to natural disasters. These are some of the impacts of the pandemic in geography. The spatial implication of COVID-19 reflect the social inequalities and multiple intersectional ways. Geographers have an invaluable opportunity to provide analysis and critics, identify good practices and mechanisms for change that would inform practice and policy making, and generate new theoretical frames. That's all. Thank you.
In this juncture, I will be explaining the nature of psychology and what are the arising problems that can be witnessed during this current time under this discipline. To start, psychology can be seen as a bridge between philosophy and physiology, where physiology describes and explains the physical makeup of the brain and nervous system. Psychology examines the mental processes that take place within them and how these are manifested in our thoughts, speech, and behavior. Whereas philosophy is concerned with thoughts and ideas. Psychology studies how we come up to have them and what they tell us about the workings of our minds. Today, we are living in a suffocated atmosphere due to the pandemic, but there are several thoughts that have been passing our heads, and we somehow leap to the conclusion that they are just some normal ideas that flow because we're humans. But if we ask ourselves, are we okay? Are you okay? Can you have a detailed answer to the question of how you feel on the inside and what kind of emotions are racing through your mind right now? It might take some time to find the right words to explain how you're feeling right now, don't you think? The challenges or difficulties that can be found in this field stem from our individual behavior, mental functions, and emotional processes. The idea of the virus has influenced how we think about our lives. Some of us are experiencing a mental health problem, which includes fear, depression, and the failure to handle stressful and depressive feelings, suicidal behavior, and emotional and behavioral changes. I will assure you that feeling and experiencing certain facets of our minds and behavior is natural. Although since the dangers of the infection, separation, anxiety from our family members, and the way our thoughts overthink the situation have all resulted in the evolution of our mental processes. The inability to reason clearly as a result of today's shifts and conditions has influenced how we act and interpret our emotions. That is all for psychology. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I'll be tackling anthropology. Anthropology is the study of the origin and development of human societies and cultures. Culture is the learned behavior of people, including their languages, belief systems, social structures, institutions, and material goods. Anthropologists study the characteristics of past and present human communities through a variety of techniques. In doing so, they investigate and describe how different people of our world lived throughout history. Here are the issues found in the field of anthropology during the pandemic. Change values in terms of individual versus collective responsibility for one's own and others' well-being, ability to maintain an intercultural mindset, and anthropology studies about the future social and cultural consequences of humanity has lessened the opportunity to research. When concepts like social distancing and social isolation are introduced, relationships as we know them are under attack. It decreases the knowledge of the human condition and the ability to maintain the aspects of understanding humanity's essence in terms of biological and cultural facets. Anthropology is relevant to everyday life. It plays a central role in an era where global understanding and recognition of diverse ways of seeing the world are critically social, political, and economic importance. It has the power to transform us, to unlock our assumptions about everything: parenting, politics, gender, race, food, economics, and so much more, revealing new possibilities and answers to our social and personal challenges. That is all. Thank you.
Demography starts with demo as in ancient Greek. It's called demos, meaning the people. While graphy as in ancient Greek, it's called grapho, meaning writing, description, or measurement. It is defined as the study of human populations, primarily to their size, their structure, and their development. It takes into account the quantitative aspects of the general characteristics. The problems arise during this pandemic are higher death rate, higher case fatality rates, disproportional time for migrants, living arrangements, and residential patterns. The leading cause of casualties is definitely diseases, especially since we're in the middle of this pandemic, but accidents also play a big role in the rise of death rates. Accordingly, it is also a bad time for migrants since this pandemic can cause delays in their migration. Adding to that is the lack of testing kits, meaning longer days in isolation. That is all for my discussion. Thank you for
So now, I will be talking about the concept of sociology and the problems that arose amidst this current pandemic. The concept of sociology is the scientific study of society, including patterns of social relationships, social interaction, and culture. The term sociology was first used by Frenchman Auguste Comte in the 1830s when he proposed a synthetic science uniting all knowledge about human activity. It is a general social science that examines those features of social action and the social structure which are, to some extent, persistent. The topics of study in the field range from the actions of individuals to global issues. It offers new ways of perceiving and analyzing social life. The methods and results of sociological research are widely used for decision-making and planning in areas such as education, healthcare, the environment, and urban planning, as well as in solving economic and social problems. Sociologists investigate the structure of groups, organizations, and societies, and how people interact within these contexts. The havoc that COVID-19 has brought globally affected millions of people in different countries. Before this pandemic occurred, we used to interact with our friends, classmates, and relatives personally. We used to travel to different places, we used to enjoy outdoor activities, and were able to have face-to-face classes. But now, everything has changed already. As we have moved further into 2020, governments around the world have imposed different types of restrictions on social life in order to end the spread of COVID-19 and flatten the curve. These have included imposing various degrees of social isolation and restrictions on things like social gatherings, travel, sport, and leisure activities, and going to work or school. That's it for sociology. Thank you for listening.
Now that we know the different issues from the respective social sciences, let us now have an open forum wherein we give our opinions and suggestions on how to solve these problems. You may utilize the raise hand button if you would like to speak.
Anthropology can be studied and can even be observed in social isolation. People who study under this discipline can expand more on the topic of isolation from past knowledge of the human condition. In fact, they can study and focus well in their homes filled with the sources online and research papers. They can also enrich their perspective to the future social isolation of humanity and study about its consequences and advantages towards the study of human societies and their cultures and their development.
For sociology, despite being stuck at our homes, the functioning of society can continue. Online as they can interact virtually in groups and important institutions related to the main objective in their projects. They can gain virtual connections and can still elaborate online into Zoom meetings, webinars, and other significant apps that meet the criteria. Society can still function online. Hence, there are a lot of benefits that can be done virtually amidst the pandemic.
That is also the same with history. There are a lot of benefits that lie under the social distancing space. Instead of studying the history outside of our homes, historians can continue the research on the historical artifacts and papers present in their office. They are at an advantage in analyzing and understanding such past events in a long period of time. It can also be implemented into through online researching about history and simply tracing its roots available on the internet. If not, they can continue learning in books.
Research is also essential for the field of linguistics. The study of applied linguistics, for instance, aims to provide solutions in relation to language-related problems. It may also be tasked to implement or strengthen multilingual instruction programs in schools so that the citizens will not have difficulty in understanding other languages. Fear-mongering can be easily solved through proper education or even through seminars in relation to this.
With all this being said, I believe that we must come up with specific strategies in order to build our economy stronger despite this crisis. First of all, local governments must prioritize resuming economic growth in the beginning of in 2021. To put this simply, they would need to be cautious about raising taxes or rapidly reducing spending in order to stabilize the debt to GDP ratio. Secondly, a consistent plan for restoring economic interest is needed, which is inextricably related to people's trust in how the pandemic and its economic fallout are being handled. The third goal is to minimize uncertainty. There is no conflict between the health and the economy. As we can see, countries who have done a decent job of keeping outbreak rates down have also done a better job of reducing the economic downturn. And lastly, business assistants will need to adopt a more sectorial strategy. Similarly, states will need to target their assistance on those in the labor market who will bear the brunt of the scarring consequences of unemployment. For example, the recession would have disproportionately negative impact on the career opportunities of young people whose transition from school to employment is interrupted.
This suggestion goes to demography. To lessen the rise of death rates, there must be special attention in terms of implementing the locally informed initiatives like treatment for the effective prevention of the risk factors. Specifically, rural areas should focus on strengthening health-related services.
In the case of psychology, raising the importance of support groups that are helping people of today and coping with situations can help lessen the anxiety and nature of negative emotions. Attending support groups that are available near the region can exemplify the needs of one's mental health. With support groups, the ability to influence a positive atmosphere can inspire people to remind themselves that they are not alone in this outbreak.
There definitely isn't a definite or instant way on how to provide a solution for COVID-19 politically wise. In every decision, there is a risk that may cancel out the possibility of a solution being created. And in our country, the Philippines has done everything possible to take precautionary measures to prevent worsening this COVID-19. Consistency is essential to a country like ours, overpopulated and not exactly rich and not also poor either. With keeping precautionary measures consistent, such as social distancing and stay-at-home rules, we're able to take control over the situation we have at hand. Keeping safe and abiding by the regulation given in our government may seem simple, but a little goes a long way.
A budget should be allotted for the building of calamity-proof infrastructure and evacuation centers. A local social media page can also be created to inform the locations with many COVID cases. Educate disaster preparedness, inform the location of evacuation centers early, and instruct precautionary measures to limit COVID-19 infection. Furthermore, each local government must have a designated emergency response group and train them in accordance with the precautionary measures caused by the pandemic. This is not to say that it is equally all of these things to all people. Some families and some areas will particularly be vulnerable to the virus's health impacts, while others look to be hit particularly hard on economic or social dimensions.
We have now reached the end of today's meeting, which ended early at 3:10 p.m. Thank you so much for your time and for joining us. We will be meeting again next week for a meeting along with the mayor. Please stay updated for the minutes and the final meeting date through your emails. Have a nice day, everyone. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.